I was halfway through pretending to enjoy my steak when my brother's fiancée turned to me, eyes wide. "Wait. You're Daniel Carter?" she said. And just like that, the room froze. Forks paused midair. Conversations cut off like someone had pulled the plug. Even my father, a man who could talk uninterrupted for 20 minutes about golf strategy, was suddenly silent. The kind of silence that screams. Moments earlier, I was just the family's walking disappointment, chewing overpriced lettuce at my younger brother's engagement dinner. The forgotten son. The failure. And now this? Let me back up. The invitation had landed on my scratched-up coffee table like a summons. Cream-colored cardstock, thick enough to feel expensive, and embossed with the names, Jonathan Carter and Amanda Reeves cordially invite you. I almost didn't go. But skipping would have been an admission of defeat. And I've been choking on that kind of defeat for a decade. Jonathan, the family's star. The Wall Street prodigy. He made partner at some Manhattan firm before 30 and bought a penthouse that overlooked Central Park. I, on the other hand, was Daniel Carter, 33, high-functioning disappointment, dropout, founder of a little tech project no one in the family bothered asking about. 10 years ago, I walked out of med school. Couldn't breathe in there, literally and figuratively. The formaldehyde, the fluorescent lights, the unbearable pressure of living someone else's dream. When I told Dad I was quitting, he didn't yell. He just stared at me like I'd defecated on the family name, then closed the door without a word. That silence was worse than any screaming. Since then, every family gathering became a quiet performance. Jonathan's accolades front and center, mine, background noise, if acknowledged at all. I remember one Christmas, he unwrapped a Rolex from Dad. I'd spent the month building the first prototype of AccessLink, a healthcare app for people with disabilities. When I shared that, Dad's reply, "Well, Danny, good to have a hobby." They never saw it as real. But it was real. Nights blurred into mornings while I coded in my tiny apartment. I was broke, exhausted, and more fulfilled than I'd ever been in that damn anatomy lab. My co-founder Alex and I launched AccessLink from a dingy sublet above a print shop in Jersey. Slowly it grew. 50 users. 500. Then thousands. A nonprofit partnership. A government contract. Then 2. By last year, we were in 12 states, helping tens of thousands of people get the care they needed. Still, my family? Clueless. Even when I tried to tell them, like the time I called Mom to share that we secured a 6-figure grant, her response? "That's great, dear. Jonathan's buying a boat. Isn't that exciting?" So, when Jonathan's engagement dinner rolled around at La Meridienne, a place so ritzy the valet looked annoyed I drove a Camry, I already knew my role. I was the quiet prop in the family photo, standing beside my overachieving brother like a cautionary tale. I wore the charcoal suit I bought with our first real paycheck. No more funeral black from Mom's passive-aggressive wardrobe suggestions. I wanted to feel like myself, not their version of failure. Inside, the restaurant glowed with crystal and quiet money. My parents were posted up at the center table like royalty. Dad reciting some golf anecdote to Amanda's parents, Mom hovering around her like a hummingbird on Adderall. And there was Jonathan. Every inch the success story. Grinning like he owned the place. "Daniel. Glad you could join us," Dad said, eyes already sliding past me. Then the classic hits, the jokes, the shade, the patronizing questions about my little website. Dad calling me a free spirit. Mom steering every conversation back to Jonathan's rising empire. Amanda's dad asked what I did, and before I could speak, Dad answered for me. "He's working on something niche. A website for healthcare. Right, son?" I clenched my jaw. But Amanda, she kept looking at me. Her expression shifted from polite to curious. "A tech company?" she asked. "What kind?" And that's when I said it, low but clear. "It's called AccessLink. We connect people with disabilities to healthcare services." Then came that voice. "Wait." She leaned in closer, eyes wide. "You're Daniel Carter?" It was the way she said it. Like she already knew the name. Like it meant something. And then she said it, just loud enough for the whole table to hear. "You're the Daniel Carter, founder of Access Link?" The room fell dead quiet. Dad's wineglass froze midair. Mom's hand went to her pearls like she'd seen a ghost. Jonathan's smirk vanished. And I sat there, the quiet brother. The invisible man. Suddenly, very, very visible. It wasn't the silence that struck me. It was the kind of silence. The kind you get in a courtroom when the verdict drops. All eyes were on me, but it didn't feel like scrutiny this time. It felt like revelation. Amanda's hazel eyes widened. "Access Link is incredible," she said, almost breathless. "My cousin Zach, he's been quadriplegic since his skiing accident last year. Your app helped him find a specialist after months of red tape. He finally got approved for adaptive therapy last week. He called Access Link a lifeline." I blinked. Once. Twice. My throat tightened. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. Instead, Amanda kept going, her voice growing more animated, as if she didn't notice the emotional bomb she just dropped, or maybe she did, and that was the point. "The rehab hospital recommends your platform now," she said, turning to her father. "Dad, it's the only tech like it. Even our foundation's board wants to partner with AccessLink. The CEO is, wait." She pointed again, eyes gleaming. "This is the guy." And just like that, the room split. On one side, Amanda, lit up with admiration. Her parents, suddenly invested, sitting up straighter. Guests who had ignored me now stealing glances, trying to piece together the story they didn't know. On the other, my family, frozen in place, their little myth unraveling. Dad looked like someone had slapped him with a lawsuit. His face paled, then flushed. Mom's lips parted slightly, eyes flicking from Amanda to me like she was trying to remember a script she'd never memorized. But it was Jonathan's expression that twisted the knife. Blank. Absolutely blank. Like someone had cut the power. Amanda turned to him, smiling. "Did you know Daniel was the CEO?" He opened his mouth. Closed it. "He's doing what your firm's nonprofit division couldn't crack," she said proudly. "I read about AccessLink's statewide integration. It's so smart. Seamless backend for clinics and users. And the community support features? Genius." Dad cleared his throat, sharp and awkward. "Well, I mean, Daniel's always had projects." He laughed nervously, waving his hand like he was swatting away a mosquito. "Very niche, of course. But good to keep busy." Amanda's smile didn't falter. But her eyebrows did raise, just slightly. "Niche?" she echoed. There it was again, that look. Not confusion. Disappointment. That word sat heavy between us like a smoking gun. It was Amanda's mom who spoke next. "Didn't you mention some investor funding Daniel?" I nodded slowly, fingers resting on the water glass. "Yeah," I said quietly. "Last quarter, we closed a Series B round. Lead investor is Caliber Health Ventures. We're integrating with state Medicaid systems now. 3 signed already." It didn't feel like bragging. It felt like surfacing. Amanda looked stunned in the best way. "You're scaling nationally. 15 states and counting." A few chairs shifted around the table. Someone coughed. A fork clinked against a plate. And that's when she said it. The twist that turned the knife and pulled it back out, for good measure. "It's funny," Amanda murmured, almost to herself. "Zach told me about AccessLink being mentioned at a fundraiser last year. Some guy at the table was laughing about the founder, saying his friend's kid was behind some little website for disabled people while his other son worked in Rio Finance. What was the name he said?" Her brows furrowed. "Carter." "Yeah. The family name was Carter." Her eyes shifted to my father. "Wait, was that your friend, Mr. Carter? Arthur Henderson?" I felt my heart stop. Arthur Henderson. Dad's golfing buddy. The man on the phone that day, months ago, the conversation I overheard but didn't fully absorb. "Oh, that little website of his. Not really a real business, you know. That wasn't just casual ignorance. It was deliberate narrative control. I felt the blood drain from my face. Dad said nothing. Mom looked like someone had yanked the floor out from under her. Amanda slowly, deliberately, looked between them. Did you know that your son's platform has helped over 80,000 people? She wasn't smiling anymore. Her voice was razor sharp. Clean. Surgical. Mom's hand flew to her throat. Daniel, we never knew the scale of it. You never asked? I said, not cruelly. Just factually. Amanda turned to me then, placed her hand lightly on mine. Your work changed my cousin's life. And mine. And I see you, Daniel. I really do. And just like that, I felt something snap, something I didn't know I'd been holding on to all these years. It wasn't rage. It wasn't grief. It was release. I turned to my family, to the people who had spent a decade sculpting me into their cautionary tale. And I said quietly, clearly, we just signed a national rollout partnership with 2 major hospital systems. Our valuation tripled this year. I'm no longer the failure you needed me to be to protect your pride. I could have stopped there. But I didn't. Because for once in my life, I wasn't just reclaiming the mic. I was rewriting the script. For a solid 30 seconds, nobody at the table moved. It was like time had slowed to the speed of humiliation. My parents' expression sat somewhere between horror and dawning clarity. Amanda was still holding my hand. Jonathan, my golden boy brother, just stared at me like I'd grown a second head and demanded the crown. Then came the smile. That smirk he always wore, the one he used to mask nerves, to grease deals, to charm his way out of consequences. But this one faltered. It twitched at the edges, brittle and sour. Dude, Jonathan finally said, chuckling. Why didn't you tell us all this? I tilted my head, studying him. I did, John. Plenty of times. You just weren't listening. He forced a laugh, glanced around the room like he was hoping to loop others into his side of the stage. Come on, man, don't make it weird. We're proud of you. I've always said you were smart. Just, doing your own thing. My father let out a dry cough that was probably meant to sound like agreement, but it caught in his throat like bad whiskey. Amanda's gaze didn't leave Jonathan's face. Did you know? She asked. Her tone was calm, but deadly focused. That access link was his? That Daniel built all that? Jonathan's smile thinned. I mean, I knew he was working on some tech thing. I didn't know it got that big. Liar. And I knew it. Because I remembered the email I sent him a year ago with the TechWire article about our funding round. The one where I asked for his advice on expanding to corporate healthcare partners. His reply? Sounds like nerd stuff, bro, stick to your lane. Let the money guys handle real scale. Amanda pressed further. So wait. You never thought to mention it to your parents? That maybe your brother wasn't just drifting? His jaw twitched. I don't tell them everything. And that's when it clicked. He knew. He knew exactly how far I'd come. But he'd kept it to himself. Not out of forgetfulness. Out of self-preservation. Because if I wasn't the underachieving brother anymore, what was he? I leaned forward, my voice low but sure. You saw the numbers, John. You Googled them. And you still let Dad say I was just keeping busy. You let Mom tell her friends I was unemployed with a cause. You let them believe that lie. He didn't deny it. Didn't even flinch. Just looked down at the table, his hands curling into polite fists. Amanda's father, who had been quietly absorbing every word like a man watching a deal go sideways, finally spoke up. This is all eye-opening, he said, casting a glance at my parents. It's strange how families can miss something right in front of them. That word, miss, was too generous. They hadn't missed anything. They'd buried it. Intentionally. Because it was easier to champion the son who fit their aesthetic of success than to acknowledge the one who quietly was successful. The toast resumed, awkwardly, like someone trying to restart music after the power flickered. I stayed seated, barely tasting the glass of champagne I finally picked up. But the damage was done. That room wasn't built for me, but suddenly, I was the structural beam holding it together. And the people who had dismissed me were now floundering in the airspace I once filled in silence. After dinner, Amanda pulled me aside near the valet. "I didn't mean to blow things up," she said softly. "No," I said. "You just said what they weren't willing to hear." We shared a long look, mutual recognition, built in a single evening. Then she said something I'll never forget. "Your brother's been different since we got engaged. He's defensive. Weird about the future. I thought it was cold feet." I raised an eyebrow. "Cold feet about marriage?" She hesitated. "Maybe. Or maybe about not being the center of attention anymore." And that's when it all came into focus. Jonathan hadn't just withheld my success. He'd actively kept it under wraps. Because my story was a threat to his narrative. If I wasn't the burnout brother, then he wasn't the savior son. And if Amanda, or her wealthy family, saw me as impressive, maybe he stopped being special. It wasn't just parental neglect anymore. It was strategic sabotage. I drove home that night with my window cracked, the New York skyline flickering in the rearview mirror. But my mind wasn't on the city. It was on my brother's face, how it looked when Amanda said my name like it meant something. And I thought about every time I'd offered him help. Every time I'd asked for advice. Every time he'd smiled and told me to focus on something real. He knew. And he chose to let me drown. But the tides had changed. And for the first time in my life, I was holding the current. The next morning, I sat in my apartment, staring at my phone like it was a loaded weapon. 10 missed calls. 4 texts from Mom, each more syrupy than the last. "Daniel, darling. Please call us. We didn't know. We want to talk. We're so proud of you." Sure. Proud. Like a jury that suddenly likes you after the verdict comes in your favor. But the worst message? The one I replayed 4 times? Jonathan's voicemail. His voice was calm, calculated. Almost like he was prepping for a quarterly investor call. "Hey man. We should talk. There's clearly been a misunderstanding. We're family. Let's not make this bigger than it is." Bigger than it is? This was never small. And deep down, he knew it. I agreed to meet him. Neutral ground. A cafe in Midtown where either of us had history, reputation, or home court advantage. I picked a table by the window, the sun cutting across the grain of the wood. I waited 10 minutes. He arrived wearing a blazer over a black tee, trying to project casual dominance, like always. "Hey," he said, sliding into the seat across from me. I didn't answer. Just watched him. Studied the lines in his face that didn't used to be there. Cracks in the polished marble. He cleared his throat, looked out the window. "You really made a show out of that dinner. You mean the one where I sat quietly for an hour while everyone celebrated you until someone else accidentally blew your cover?" His smile twitched. "Look, it's not like that. I didn't mean for it to get weird." I leaned in slightly. "Jonathan, did you know what Access Link had become?" He hesitated for half a second. And that was all I needed. "Yes or no?" He exhaled through his nose, like a man forced into honesty. "Yes." I felt it like a body blow. He continued, eyes on the coffee in front of him. "I read the article you sent. Saw the Tech Forum piece too. I knew you were doing well. But I didn't realize." "Didn't realize what?" "That it mattered?" He looked up then, jaw tight. "Look, I didn't hide it. I just didn't advertise it. Okay? You let Mom and Dad believe I was still struggling." His voice hardened. "They were already locked into that narrative. It made things easier. For you," I said. He looked away. The silence stretched, thick and hot between us. Then he said it. Not flippantly. Not bitterly. But honestly. "I needed to be the successful one. That was my role." I blinked. "Your role? Like we're in a school play?" "You don't get it," he snapped. I was the one with the pressure. The one who carried their expectations. You got to flake off and do your weird projects. I had to win. I had to be the example. I laughed once. Low. Bitter. So to protect your identity as the winner, you needed me to lose. His jaw worked silently for a second. I didn't think it would blow up like that. But it did, I said. And now you're scrambling. Not because you're sorry. Because you got exposed. He leaned back, folding his arms. What do you want from me, Daniel? A confession? You want me to admit I played the game? Fine. I did. I didn't want to lose my place in the family food chain. And if that meant you stayed in the shadows, I figured you were comfortable there. I stared at him. Really stared. And what I saw wasn't power or pride or even malice. It was fear. He wasn't angry that I'd succeeded. He was terrified that I didn't need their approval anymore. Because without that power dynamic, who was he? Just a guy in a suit, watching his younger brother step into the light. I don't want anything from you, I said quietly. I just needed to see it with my own eyes. How far you'd go to protect your story. He stood up, adjusting his jacket, already halfway out the door. You think you're better than me now? He muttered. No, I said, sipping my coffee steady. I always was. I just stopped apologizing for it. He didn't respond. Didn't turn around. Just walked out, leaving the bell above the cafe door to mark the end of a brotherhood that had never really been one. That night, I met with my parents. One last time. The meeting wasn't scheduled. It was summoned. I texted them, Dad and Mom, 2 words. Tonight. 7 p.m. My place. They showed up 10 minutes early. Of course they did. Dad wore his old Stanford sweatshirt, the one he dusted off for casual credibility. Mom brought a bundt cake, like we were about to reminisce instead of dismantle 20 years of buried shame. I let them in silent. No hugs. No forced smiles. Just the hum of my apartment, quiet, measured, mine. They sat awkwardly at the kitchen table. My table. The one I bought with the first payout from our public health contract. Dad looked at the walls like he was inspecting a stranger's house. Mom adjusted her scarf 3 times. I sat across from them. No small talk. No coffee. Just truth. You spent the last 10 years telling everyone who I was. I began, voice steady, even as my heart thudded like a second clock. Dad opened his mouth, but I held up a hand. Don't interrupt. You said I was drifting, figuring things out. You told your friends I was working on a hobby. You said it with pride when it was Jonathan's title, but with pity when it was mine. Mom began, but I cut in again, firm. You built a story where I was the failure because that made everything else cleaner. Simpler. One success. One disappointment. You didn't ask questions. You didn't listen. You just decided. Dad's jaw flexed. We didn't understand what you were building. You didn't want to. I snapped. Because that would have complicated the narrative. If I succeeded, Jonathan didn't look as bright. And that was unacceptable. The room was thick with the weight of unspoken history. I needed your belief. I said, my voice softening. Not your approval. Not your pride. Just a chance to be seen for who I was. Mom looked like she might cry. But for once, I didn't reach across the table. I let the silence sting. Then I said the words I never thought I'd say out loud. I don't need your validation anymore. That ship sailed. I needed it when I was 22, standing in the hallway after I dropped out of med school, praying you'd still love me. I needed it when I showed you our beta app, hoping for a nod. I don't need it now. Because I love what I do. I love who I'd become. Mom let out a soft, broken, "We're sorry." But it didn't land. Because what I'd come to understand, what I'd earned, was that being sorry didn't rewrite what came before. It didn't unspread the whispers. Didn't undo the damage of a decade spent under their thumb, shrinking myself so I wouldn't rock the family boat. I stood slowly. I want space. Not forever. But for now. I need to build my life where your story doesn't decide my worth. They didn't stop me. Didn't beg. They just nodded, unsure and small, like the myth of their authority was crumbling in real time. And I let them go. A few months later, I got a call from Amanda. She sounded tired. A little embarrassed. "We're calling off the wedding," she said. I wasn't surprised. She told me Jonathan had grown cold. Jealous. That he'd brought up accessing too often, but never kindly. That the resentment simmered. That he'd finally admitted what she suspected all along, that he couldn't stand how people looked at me now. "I need someone who's proud of others," she said. "Not someone who keeps score." I didn't gloat. I just said, "You deserve better." The last scene? It wasn't dramatic. It was just real. I stood backstage at a national digital health summit. 1,000 people in the audience. Doctors. Developers. Patients. People who mattered. I looked down at the notes in my hand, but I didn't need them. Because this was my story. One I built. One I lived. I stepped into the light. The applause wasn't thunderous. It was something better. Earned.